You are watching a screen that shows you the sky. It is not showing you the sky. It is showing you a version of the sky with certain things removed, and the decision about what to remove was made years before you ever sat down in front of it. Not by you, not by anyone in the room. So, this is not a story about what might be flying over your head tonight. It is a story about the instruments we built to look, and about one engineering decision buried so deep inside them that almost nobody thinks to question it. Because underneath all of this, there is a question nobody can currently answer. How much of the sky have we never actually observed? Here is what most people believe, and it seems reasonable enough. A radar within its range sees what is there. It sweeps, it listens, and objects appear. That was never true. It was never even the goal. The network guarding the northern approaches to North America was designed to find one very particular thing: aircraft and missiles. Fast, high, metallic, closing distance. Dozens of radar stations strung across the Canadian Arctic and Alaska, built in the closing years of the Cold War, tuned with real precision to catch the enemy everyone expected. Then, recently, a large balloon drifted across the continent in full public view, and the officer responsible for detecting threats to North American airspace said something that should have been a far bigger story than it was. He said that 4 previous balloons had crossed or approached that airspace, and his command had detected none of them. He did not say the radars were too old. He did not say they were too weak. He said the opposite. He said the radars were physically capable of seeing the object. The system was filtering that data out. Sit with that for a moment. The signal came back. The return arrived at the antenna. The information was there, and the machine examined it, concluded it was not the kind of thing anyone was interested in, and discarded it before a human being ever saw it. The balloon was drifting at roughly 65,000 feet, and it was slow and high, and not especially reflective, which puts it outside the envelope the system was built to care about, not by accident, by design. And when the fix came, it was not new hardware. It was not a new satellite or a new radar station. Officials described it as fine-tuning, making the existing radars more sensitive to things that were high, slow, and small. They changed a setting, but that filter is not a flaw. It was the solution to an older problem, and to understand why it exists at all, you have to go back to the first unidentified flying objects ever recorded, which appeared long before anyone was arguing about what they meant. During the Second World War, radar was still new enough that nobody was entirely sure what it was supposed to show. Operators in Britain and in the United States began seeing things on their displays that had no business being there. Moving echoes, returns out of empty air, drifting across the screen with nothing visible beneath them. They came at dawn and at dusk. They had no aircraft attached to them. The operators nicknamed them angels. The name wasn't entirely a joke. In the middle of a war, staring at a display showing something clearly present and clearly not a plane, a certain amount of speculation ran towards the supernatural. Sir Edward Fennessy, the man responsible for the British radar chain, reportedly recalled afterwards that no explanation was ever found, and that nobody spent any time investigating, because there was a war on, which may be the most human sentence in the entire history of this problem. Something is on the screen. We do not know what it is. We do not have time, but 2 men did have time, or they made it. David Lack was an ornithologist, a bird specialist, seconded to the Army Operational Research Group, and later the director of the Edward Gray Institute of Field Ornithology at Oxford. George Varley was an entomologist, an insect specialist. Neither of them was a radar engineer. Both of them were something the radar engineers were not. They were trained field observers. Their entire professional discipline consisted of going outside and watching very carefully. They proposed that the angels were alive. And then they did the thing that separates an answer from a theory. They went and looked. They matched what was appearing on the screen against what was moving through the air above them, and they identified the source. Northern gannets, large seabirds traveling in numbers at exactly the times of day when birds travel. The first unidentified flying objects ever detected by an electronic sensor were birds. Later work in Zurich by Ernst Sutter established that the fainter and more elusive angels were smaller still. Songbirds, migrating at night, invisible from the ground, and lighting up military radar. But the interesting part is not the answer. It is what happened next. The engineering response to that discovery was not curiosity. It was removal. Birds were not the enemy, so birds became noise. And everything else that was not the enemy became noise alongside them. The machinery for subtracting all of it was refined, generation after generation, until it disappeared into the background of how these systems simply work. So the question is no longer what is in the sky. The question is what that subtraction has been quietly deleting every second for as long as it has existed. And here is where it gets strange. To understand the blind spot, you have to understand why anyone would build one deliberately. Point a radar at the horizon, and the overwhelming majority of what comes back is the ground. Hills, buildings, trees, waves, rain. In the trade, this is called clutter, which simply means everything the instrument detects that you did not want it to detect. Clutter is not a minor effect. It can be thousands of times stronger than the aircraft you are actually trying to find. Left alone, it makes the display useless. But the ground has one property that saves you. It does not move. When a radar pulse bounces off something stationary, it returns at exactly the frequency it left with. When it bounces off something traveling towards you or away from you, that frequency shifts. So you build a filter that rejects everything arriving with no change in frequency, or almost none. The ground vanishes. The aircraft remains. This works beautifully. It is also the origin of the problem, and the problem has three parts. The first, anything moving slowly produces almost no shift in frequency, so the filter cannot distinguish it from a hillside. It is rejected. The second, anything crossing your beam sideways is barely changing its distance from you, whatever its actual speed. So it is rejected too. The third is the one that should keep people awake. The rejection does not happen only once. It repeats at regular intervals all the way up the scale of speeds. There are specific velocities at which a fast, solid, entirely real object produces a return. The filter cancels along with the terrain. Engineers call these blind speeds. They are not a malfunction. They fall directly out of the mathematics of how the filter is built. And the settings fight each other. Widen the rejection to catch more ground traffic, and you delete more real objects along with it. Narrow it, and false alarms fill the display until the whole thing is meaningless. There is no setting that sees everything. There has never been one. Every filter is a decision about what is not worth looking at, made in advance, by someone who is not in the room when it matters. So, what happens when you take an instrument built to find fast metal on an intercept course and ask it to adjudicate reports of strange objects? The government's own numbers tell that story. And they do not tell the story most people expect. In the most recent full reporting cycle, the Pentagon office responsible for these cases received 757 reports. The overwhelming majority were in the air, and the cases that did resolve came back with the least dramatic answers available: balloons, birds, drones, satellites, aircraft. A small residue did not resolve. Around 20 cases were described in that report as genuinely anomalous. The director of the office, a physicist by training, said publicly that there are cases he does not understand and does not believe anyone else understands either. He also said in the same briefing that there is no evidence of extraterrestrial beings, activity, or technology. Both statements are in the record. Both are worth taking at face value. But neither of those categories is the large one. The largest single group in that report was neither explained nor mysterious. 444 cases lacked sufficient data to begin an analysis at all. Not unexplained. Unanalyzable. There was simply not enough information in the file to start. That is more than half of everything reported. And an earlier government assessment, working through a smaller set of incidents, managed to positively identify exactly one of them with high confidence. It was a large, deflating balloon. This is what the phenomenon actually looks like from the inside. Not a sky full of impossible objects. A filing cabinet full of returns too thin to work with, produced by sensors that were never built for the question being asked of them. Which is the point where this stops being a curiosity and becomes a defense problem. If the blind spot is defined by the filter rather than by the object, then an adversary needs no exotic technology at all. It does not need to outrun anything or outmaneuver anything. It needs only to match the profile the filter is already discarding: slow, high, small, or simply crossing sideways. That is not a hypothetical flight profile. That is a balloon. That is a description of the cheapest surveillance platform available to anyone, and one of them crossed a continent. The same early government assessment that cataloged all those strange sightings names this directly. It lists the appropriate filtering of radar clutter as a long-standing technical challenge for the entire aviation community. The problem was identified in writing in the document everyone was reading while looking for something else entirely. And the gap cuts in both directions at once. It hides the mundane threat, the balloon, the drone, the thing an adversary can build this year for very little money. And it also destroys the evidence that would settle the genuinely interesting cases. The strange report arrives with no corroborating radar track, not because there was nothing there, but because the object was flying inside the rejection band, and the system did precisely what it was built to do. You cannot investigate a return that was deleted before anyone looked at it. So they changed the setting. After the balloon was brought down, the radars were retuned to search for objects that were small, slow, and high. The commander described the result carefully. Better categorization of the tracks. Within days, 3 more objects were detected over Alaska, the Yukon, and Lake Huron. All 3 were engaged. Now ask the obvious question. How many objects had been up there during all the years before somebody adjusted that filter? The question has no answer. Not because it is classified, because a filter does not store what it removes. It removes it. Those returns were rejected at the moment of collection, in hardware, before anything was written to any record anywhere. There is no archive to go back to. There is no file to declassify. The information reached the antenna, and then it was gone. And there is a deeper version of this problem, and it came from scientists rather than soldiers. The independent panel convened by NASA to examine this question, chaired by David Spergel, president of the Simons Foundation and formerly an astrophysicist at Princeton, found that the analysis is crippled at the root. Poor calibration of the sensors. Single measurements where several were needed. Missing information about the instruments themselves. And then the one that matters most. No baseline data. We have never systematically measured what an ordinary sky contains. Nobody has established the normal rate at which strange-looking things appear, over a given patch of airspace on a given afternoon. And without that number, anomalous is not a measurement. It is just a word. This is not only true of air defense. Every instrument that looks upward makes the same bargain. The great automated sky surveys, the ones hunting asteroids and exploding stars, generate more candidate detections in a single night than any group of humans could ever examine. So they filter. They discard everything that fails to match the profile of what they expect to find. And they have to, because otherwise the data would be unusable. Every one of those filters is a hypothesis about what deserves attention. And a hypothesis can be wrong quietly. It can be wrong for decades without ever producing an error, because a system tuned to find one thing does not report the things it was tuned to ignore. It reports nothing. It reports a clear sky. That is the part worth sitting with, not what might be out there. What a machine built to find one specific thing does with everything else it sees. The sky we have been watching all this time is not the sky. It is the sky we agreed to look at.